morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to speak with Naomi today because Naomi helps people through their stress management. And so when people, let's be real, stress is a needed thing, right? We need stress, it's part of our lives. Where we run into issues is when we're not completing the cycle, when we're not managing it, when we're resisting it, when we're not paying attention to what our body needs. And so Naomi helps professionals and educators who are stuck in this stress cycle and they're not closing the loop so that they can love their life and career again. And so, Naomi, could you tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Sure. So my background is in education, so high stress field, and I burned out a couple of times. And I really had to fight my way back. I had to figure out how to stay in the career I love that was literally sucking the life out of me. And it was for different reasons at different points in my career. Toxic environments, super toxic environments, a couple of times that I had to choose to leave. And losing my own identity in my career. Like when I was laid off the first time, which you go into education thinking you have job security, and honestly, you don't. So I've been laid off twice. So the first time I was laid off, I was like, I don't know who I am without this. Like when I'm not walking down the hallway, and I know this sounds crazy to a lot of people, when I'm not walking down the hallway filled with teenagers, like I don't know who I am. And so I had to find my identity in something solid and unchanging. And for me, that is in my faith. I am a child of God. I am a daughter of the High King. That does not change. My career will change, my environment will change, all of that will change. But who I am, that doesn't change. And so that was a piece of it. And then the second time I was let go, which is another shocking moment in my career. A friend called and was like, listen, if you start your business, we'll support you. I'm like, well, now I got to take this seriously. Like, I have somebody that's willing to stand by me, support me in this. I need to figure out what my business is. And so I'm sitting there again, still reeling from this. I just lost my job totally unexpectedly. My contract's not being renewed. Like, what am I gonna do? And it was politics this time. And I was like, the recovering educator. Like that is who I am, recovering from the stress, the burnout, the politics. I want to take this to other people and help those high achieving, driven professionals who are burning out because you're trying to do everything. And kind of like what this summit is about, the mom who's like got the world on her shoulders because she thinks she has to do it all on her own. And I'm like, no, you don't. I am here to help you and provide the support so that you can get out of that stress cycle. You can get out of that burnout. You can come back from burnout. You can heal and you can stay in your career. You don't have to leave. My goal in starting my business was not to leave education. It was to provide the support I didn't have. And so I've expanded to other professions because education is not the only field that's stressful. Being a mom is stressful. Being a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, a realtor, whatever your career is stressful. Living life is stressful. So my goal was to provide the services and the support that I didn't have. And that for me is through building a foundation of stress management habits, because when you build a house, you want a solid foundation or your house is going to crumble, it's going to fall apart. You are the exact same way. If you don't have a solid foundation, and I know you kind of deal with this in the world of letting go of alcohol and that cycle, like you have to have this solid foundation or you just fall apart. And so my 5 foundations are movement, sleep, nutrition, hydration, and mindset. When we get those locked in, we can manage our life, we can manage our stress, and then the stress management techniques actually work. Because like people are like, I've tried them, they don't work. And I'm like, you're right, they don't, because you don't have a solid foundation and you haven't built habits. And so that's really how I approach it.
That makes so much sense. And I love how you said that you took your experience with your career And so we talk about this all the time, turning your mess into your message. Like that's
Mhm.
exactly what is driving me to do this. Like I never had any thoughts of being an entrepreneur, running a business, none, never. So that was like, but when I realized that there were so many people that were stuck where I was, like, and it was a lot of it was tied to that identity thing. Like I was tying my identity to things outside of me that I didn't have any control over. And so I was fragile because if any of those things fell apart, then my whole world would come crashing down. And the same thing happened to me when I got laid off not that long ago. And I was, and my identity wasn't just tied to my career, it was tied to being an employee, being a hard worker, being like everything got upside down for me. But when I detached from that identity,
Mhm.
I was like, immediately, it's crazy the mindset thing, how that works. And
Mhm.
I swear to God, if people knew that, like if they could feel it
Mhm.
working, and it takes a little bit of time because if you're looking for it, it doesn't happen
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
you can't force it. But
Right.
once you practice the tools I'm sure you talk about,
Mhm.
is you start to see little things changing and then you build on that. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you said like little changes. And so many times what we struggle with is like you just think like January 1st, people jump in full force. I'm gonna like overhaul my life and it's gonna be fantastic. And I'm gonna lose 35 pounds and I'm gonna, eat super clean and I'm gonna be a nice person and I'm gonna, do this and that and that. And then you get 1 week in and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm exhausted. I'm gonna binge Ben and Jerry's and eat pizza and skip the gym and I'm gonna sleep 24 hours. And you just let go of everything that you wanted to accomplish. When if you had said, I'm gonna make one small change, it's that 1% change. And it's Darren Hardy, I think, is the author of The Compound Effect. And he talks about that 1% change over time ends up being making a huge difference. So if we started small with let's make 1% change, let's be 1% better today, that's doable. That's achievable. And that's kind of what we were talking about even before we started recording was the doable, the small change, the small little bit that your brain is like, oh yeah, yeah, I can do that. And then you get success. And you're like, oh, well, if I can do that, what's the next 1%? Oh yeah, I can do that. And that becomes sustainable. That's really the key is, can I sustain this? And so working with our brain rather than against our brain and going, oh yeah, I can do that. I can make that little change and working on our mindsets and little changes in our mindset and getting the dopamine hits of success, then your brain's like, yeah, I did that. Let's do it again. And let's do it again. And let's do it again. Rather than the like, I did it all and I can't do it and I'm a failure. And then you're in your head and you're become self-defeating of like, I can't do this. Why do I even bother trying? I'll just put up with the extra weight and whatever.
That's exactly why so many people don't, they fail at stopping drinking because they're trying to change this one behavior, like flipping a switch, black and white, straight to don't drink from drinking. And that's why what we do, how we help people works, because we don't like, nobody's going to be able to do that when you put that much, just like you said, when you have this high goal and you make one mistake, you get stuck in your head, you slide backwards, you have setbacks, and we see it happen all the time. It happened to me. And
Mhm.
then when I started giving myself permission to, I don't have to do this overnight, that was one of the big reasons why the program that we teach works, and it worked for
Mhm.
me. And I think that was the same for you too, right, Stephanie?
Yeah, and this analogy I really like to use too is thinking about how a baby learns how to walk, right? And maybe it's been a little bit since your babies have done that, but I have a baby right now and she's pulling herself up, right? And she'll get a little excited and start moving and then she'll fall down, right?
Mhm.
And that's part of the process. She'll
Yeah.
dust herself off, and gets back up and was excited about it again because she made a little bit of progress. She went further this time than she did last time. And so she's like, yeah, I'm going to do it. Right. And so we have that naturally ingrained in us. It's just all the gobbledygook that we get along the way that we kind of have to weed through so that, and I love that Naomi brings in this mindset aspect because that is such a huge piece of it. But we also, like you said, Naomi, we have to work with it. We can't jump from point A to point Z of being like, I don't know how to walk to I'm running marathons, right?
Yeah.
There's a big in between there, and we have to give ourselves grace and compassion, cheer ourselves along, get support, right? I'm there cheering my baby on, and sometimes not. Sometimes I tell her to sit down, and I don't want her walking because she's only 9 months old, right? So, but like that's what we need as humans, right?
That's why
Yeah.
babies even walk are able to, because they don't get stuck in their own head judging themselves because they fell down and failed. Like, they just don't have that in their brain. We were that way too at one point, but so that's exactly why they keep getting up and keep getting up. And I've never seen a baby not get up again after they just don't.
Yeah. I love that because like mistakes are not failure. Like we tell our kids, like, you learn by your mistakes. And I'm in education. That was my background. You're learning when you make mistakes because you find out what you did wrong and you get to correct it. We get to be the same way. We get to change that mindset for ourselves of mistakes aren't failure. Mistakes are just part of the journey and they're beautiful. And I'm in a transformational leadership program right now. And breakdown is beautiful because that's where you learn, that's where you grow, that's where you find out what's holding you back, what you tripped over. And so looking at mistakes is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I also am a martial artist. And when I do a form perfectly, I don't learn anything from it. But when I mess up my forms and I get stuck, there's somebody there to help me and point out what I did. I'm like, oh, okay, that's my mistake. And I learn and I grow and I do it better next time. But we forget to apply that to ourselves in our lives of these mistakes, these stumbles along the way. Oh, that's why I went back to drinking again. Oh, that's why I went back to, it can be alcohol, it can be food, it can be anything. Like there are so many things that are addictive in our lives that we're like, well, I don't do alcohol, but maybe I binge Oreos or, whatever it is. I'm like, oh, that's why I went to it. Okay, so that like I need to go back to the emotional issue that triggered it, or I need to go back to the situational trigger that caused it. And so looking at mistakes as this opportunity to grow and to learn, when we get there, like you are unstoppable when you look at mistakes that way. And when you have like that grand vision of running the marathon, but you're back here and you go, okay, I know where I'm headed. Well, what's the next step there, rather than like going out and trying to run the marathon? Because like I've run 2 halves. That counts as running a marathon, right? Like 2 halves add up to a whole.
That's to me.
That's math. Yeah.
Like I don't need to run a whole. Like it took training, it took a process. And so like allowing ourselves the ability to grow and learn and process is so important. And like you said, getting that help and someone cheering you on, like you said, like you're cheering your daughter on as she learns and falls and dusts herself off. Like we get to go back to being that child learning to walk and like, all right, dust my knees off, have a good cry because I like cracked my head when I fell, but all right, getting back up and I'm going at it again. And I'm going to get another step farther this time.
This seems like it's all tied in, like the stress that people are under, especially educators trying to live up to these impossible standards in their minds. Like they have this standard that is way up there. And if they're not coming close, and I bet even they don't give themselves a break, or this probably applies to anyone in any career. When you've been doing it for a long time, you're like, I should know better. I did the same thing. I should know better. I shouldn't be making these mistakes. But like we don't give ourselves a break, and that high standard plus, and then the identity thing, because that's your identity. When you feel like you're failing at that thing, Like
Yep.
it's all wrapped up. I could see how the stress just like becomes
Absolutely.
overwhelming. That's
Yeah.
burnout.
Yeah. Perfectionism is a big mindset in there of like, I should do everything perfectly. I shouldn't make mistakes. Other people should do things perfectly and not make mistakes. I find myself in that one too often. I'm upset that somebody made a mistake, but like, I make mistakes. I'm human. Like, it's okay if other people make mistakes too.
I
Like, we
love
can
that you
fix,
said that.
we
And I
can
just
work.
want to say, because sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but and I try so hard not to. I'm sorry, but that was, and I hope you'll talk about this, but that was one of the things that I started to notice about myself that made me want to start to change. Like I started realizing how that's not who I am, like being that way to people and being so like I was so negative in my head about other people that I was like, what? Because they made a mistake? Like what? So when I was able to start showing that compassion to the other people and knowing that that's not who I am, it was I was able to start showing that same grace to myself. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
brought that up.
Yeah. And that's so important. Like, just starting to realize and that's part of my work, what I work on with clients. It's like, okay, let's start not just the behavior that you're demonstrating, let's dig into what's behind that behavior. What's the thought process that you're going through? What's the story that you're telling yourself? Whether it's perfectionism and I need to be perfect or somebody else needs to be perfect, unreasonable expectations. This is a huge one. Unreasonable expectations of myself, of the world, of other people, of like, I love this one. If I'm nice to people, they'll be nice back to me. I taught teenagers. Okay, like teenagers. You can be nice to a teenager and they'll still growl at you. Like, reality, folks. Like, it just doesn't work that way. I can be a nice driver and do what I'm supposed to, and I will still get honked at and flipped off. Right. And I'm like, and then we have like, because we have this unrealistic expectation that we're like, what in the world? Why are they treating me that way? Whether it's the teenager or the other driver. And then we're all worked up because somebody reacted in a certain way. And maybe they were having a bad day. Maybe your teenager didn't get enough sleep. Maybe the driver just had like, maybe they just got broken up with, maybe they just got laid off, whatever. Maybe their world is falling apart and I'm expecting them to be perfect. And so, like, digging back into these, why do I expect people to behave that way? What are my expectations of other people? What are my expectations of myself? Am I just setting myself up for failure because I have these unattainable expectations for myself that, like, nobody can do? Like, you don't have to be super mom. Like, you do not have to feed your children a perfectly clean, organic, no dyes, no artificial, whatever, all the time. You are not a bad mom because you put dino nuggets in the oven and fed them dino nuggets, french fries, and ketchup for supper because you're tired. Your children are fed, right? Like, you snapped at your kids. Okay. Did you go back and apologize to your kids? Because we all lose it sometimes, right? Like, cut yourself some slack and look at like, okay, so yeah, I yelled at my kids, but you know what? I went back and I apologized and I hugged them and loved them, and we're moving forward and I'll do better next time. Yeah, I fed my kids dino nuggets and applesauce for the third night in a row, or Kraft mac and cheese, whatever it is that you think is not healthy. You fed your kids. You loved your kids. You were present with your kids. Like, you don't have to take it all on. And to ask for help, that's huge. Like, there is a world of people around you that love you and are willing to help you if you would say, hey, I'm struggling and I need help. There are people around. We're all here to do it. That's what we do in our businesses. We're that support for you when you're like, I have lost it. I am like falling apart. My life is falling apart and I don't know what to do. We get to come in and support you and say, hey, we've been there. We've been sobbing on the couch at 10 o'clock at night because there's so much to do and we don't know how to do it. Or we found ourselves elbows deep in the alcohol bottle, the box of Oreos, the whatever it is.
Netflix.
destructive, whatever the destructive behavior is, we've been there. My choice is food. I've been there and I know what it does to my body and I don't like it. And I don't like how I feel when I eat that way and do that and self-medicate in that way. I made a choice that I wanted to change my life and I wanted to change my health. And I was going to take back control of every piece that I could. There are things that I can't control. And that's part of stress management as well, is realizing there are things I can't control. There is stress that I can't control. Life happens. You get the flat tire, you get laid off, somebody breaks up with you, somebody walks out, somebody flips you off, those things happen. But what I can control is right here. I can control my mindset. I can control my behavior. I can dig into my emotions and my responses and figure out what's behind them and why I react that way.
I could go on all day about what control issues, like how they affect your life so negatively and how that all tied into my story too. But I would I would think, and this is what happened to me, but I bet it's probably common, the the resistance towards change, like by lowering my standards. I was like, what? Like, I don't want to lower my standards. Like, I'm proud of the, especially with work, like, I'm proud of being a hard worker, being the hardest worker in the company or whatever it is. Like, if I lower my standard, then am I selling myself short? And so is that a resistance that you see a lot, like from people not wanting, oh, there it goes again, not wanting to try to not, like, to give up that standard, or and then think that they're gonna not be less than or not worthy or something.
Yeah, definitely. And that comes back to mindset of like that perfectionism and I can't let go of this. What will I be without this? That ties into that identity piece of who am I if I'm not living up to this standard? And as you dig into that, you're like, but whose standard is it actually? Is it your standard, or is it a standard you were held to as a child that you weren't allowed to make mistakes, that you were punished for mistakes? So much of how I react, I'm a high achiever, very driven, performance oriented. And I'm finding so much of that ties back to my childhood of looking for affection and acceptance through my performance. And so I learned to achieve and perform and to be at the top. And for different people, it's different reasons. But a lot of us who strive to be at the top all the time, there's something in our childhood that drives that. And so, yeah, digging back into that, and so many of us are resistant to change because we feel like it threatens who we are. But like we were talking about before, when we settle our identity on something solid and unchanging, then it becomes safe to dig into these things and say, okay, can I change my standard? Why do I have that standard? And this is one of the things I teach my perfectionists, because I can be a perfectionist. Perfection is the enemy of completion because there's always more that you can do. And so done is better than perfect, right? But for those of us who are perfectionists, that's really hard to let go of. So I'm like, all right, I want you to shoot for 80%. And this is a rule that also applies to leadership. When you hit 80% complete, you move on. Because as a perfectionist, your 80% is probably better than most people's 100%, to be honest. So you're actually doing really, really well, stopping at 80%. In leadership, if someone on your team can do what you're doing 80% as well as what you're doing, it's time to hand that task to them and they get to grow into that last 20%. Because you think of like when you start a new job, you were not 100% when you took on that job. Let me tell you, when I started teaching, oh my goodness, there's so many things they don't teach you in college. You're like, why did nobody tell me any of this? Like, I know the period. So my background is science. I was a science teacher. Like, I know the periodic table. I can do chemical reactions. I can do physics. I can do the calculations. I know the human body. Like, I was like general in science. So like, I knew a lot of stuff, but I'm like, oh my goodness, nobody told me it was this hard, or nobody told me that this would happen, or nobody told me that. And I had to grow into it. Didn't mean I wasn't ready for the job. There were just parts of it I had to grow into. So when it comes to leadership, remember that about the people who work under you, because that can be a real stress reliever for you when you realize you can delegate at 80%. Like, you know what, that person can do it 80% as well as I can, so they get to take this on, because that frees you up from the like the mundane day-to-day everything. When you're leading, you're not supposed to be doing all of those things. It's time to hand those off so that you can oversee more and manage more and train people and grow your people.
That I think the delegation piece is something that was really hard for me too. And when I use the turnaround of I'm stealing their opportunity to get better at this because I'm keep taking this away from them. Like that's not helping them grow. I have to let them do it and do it, fail it, or not do as well as I do, because they're never going to be able to do better if they don't have that opportunity. That helps me like let go of stuff little by little, just starting. I had to change what I was focused on, thinking things had to be done the right way, or I was going to get in trouble. And I had to make myself think about the benefits to the other people and the company as a whole, because if there's more than one person that can do this thing really well, that's better. Like that's good.
Yeah. And it applies at home too, as moms, of training your children to do jobs. Like you teach them, but then you start to let go and say, you know what, it's okay if they don't vacuum the floor completely. They're learning. And I get to teach them and like, hey, could you get the spots that you missed? It's okay if your spouse loads the dishwasher differently than you. They loaded it and the dishes will get clean. You may just have to walk away and not look at it and just say, you know what? They did it. I'm not watching. I'm going to go do something else. And teaching your kids to make their bed, fold their laundry. As they're little, they're doing it with you, but then you gradually step back and say, you know what? It's not folded how I would fold it, but it's folded and put away. So I'm going to let that go and we'll work on it again next time. So like that delegation to your children and just releasing that control of it has to be perfect and it has to be done my way. Done is done, right? And you teach them all along the way. You know what, when you take the trash out, you have to actually put it into the big can, you know, not leave it next to it. And so you get to teach them and help them grow in those areas.
And you might actually find that they do have a more efficient way of doing it. If you leave yourself open to it, you might say, oh, I do like how you fold those towels. That is more convenient. That does fit better. Or, you know,
Mhm.
and so allowing yourself to be open and not that it has to be this way, black and white,
Mhm.
can allow for more creativity, for more solutions. Um, and I will say there's a lot of patience that happens during this period where you're teaching and they're learning and we're growing, right? It takes a lot of energy to grow. And so noticing that and allowing it and saying you're changing, you're growing, you're learning. It takes a lot of energy, and like allow yourself like any extra rest you need and hydration, right? And so we probably should talk a little bit more about these 5 foundations of how we get that set up so we can be open, we can be patient, we can do all these things.
Yeah, they're so important. And I think we downplay the importance of them. And as they're too simple. Like that's so basic. Like you gotta have something bigger for me. I'm like, no, like you need the basics. You like your child is not running a marathon. She's learning the basics of walking. She's learning to stand up. She's learning to take a step. She's learning how to dust herself off. So like movement, when I started my journey, I was like, I want to lose this weight because I had extra weight. I hated looking at myself. I hated being in pictures. Like nothing fit. I could only wear a few things in my closet. So that my goal was weight loss. But as I lost the weight, I was like, I feel amazing. I feel so good. I have my energy back. And then I realized how much it benefited me mentally. And so now, yes, I want to look good. I want to be strong, all of that. But also, I know if I don't work out regularly, my mindset suffers. And so I work out in the morning and I train like 4 to 5 days a week as a martial artist because those are two of my major stress relievers. And when I don't have them, my mind spirals. And so I'm like, okay, I got to get into the gym. I got to get to the dojo. Like I got to do these things. And some of the martial arts is like the community aspect as well, of connecting with people. People are expecting to see me there. I'm learning, I'm teaching, like all these pieces to it. So movement, start small. If you're not moving your body, you're not working out, start with a 5-minute dance party, put on your favorite song and dance in the kitchen with your kids. Like that counts. Go take a walk with your kids, put your kids in the stroller, go take a walk, put the dog on the leash and go. Start small. Hydration, just add another glass of water in the morning. Drink a glass of water before you do anything else so that you're adding an extra 8 ounces of water first thing in the morning. And try to get your water done earlier in the day so you're not up all night going pee. Food. If you are not fueling your body well, you're not going to think well, you're not going to feel well, you're not going to fight off all of the viruses that your kids bring home from school and daycare, all of that. So again, keep it simple. Add veggies to breakfast. Like that gets you an extra serving of veggies in your day because most of us don't eat veggies at breakfast. So add that in. Add more protein. Keep it simple. Have a larger serving of what you're already eating for protein. Like we don't need to complicate it. Movement, hydration, sleep. Again, keep it simple. My trick for getting more sleep, and I know it's really hard when you have little ones because you get interrupted sleep. Like that's just the season that you're in. So some of it is give yourself grace, sleep when you can, and like try to get as much as you can. But rather than like trying to go straight to the 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night, keep it simple. What time did you go to bed last night? For the next week, I want you to go to bed 2 minutes earlier than that. So if it was 10 last night, make it 9:58 tonight. Because we're working with our brain. That's something we can achieve. You're like, well, if I went to bed at 10 and 9:58, like that's easy, right? We want the like that Staples button, the easy button. That was easy. And then once you manage that, like do another 2 minutes earlier, 9:56. And you're like, look at this, no big deal. Look at what I am accomplishing. Like I am amazing. You're working with your brain and you're getting success and you're getting those dopamine hits and like, all right, this is awesome. And before you know it, you're getting an extra half hour of sleep a night, even if your sleep is interrupted by your children. And then mindset, I would just say start with noticing your mindsets, noticing the negativity in your brain, because we have like, I want to say about 50,000 thoughts a day, and 80 to 90% of them are negative. Like think of the conversation you are having with yourself on the daily. What are you saying to yourself? Because I guarantee you would never talk to your child the way you talk to yourself. And so just starting to notice that. And then my favorite tip here, it seems, again, so simple, but it's so helpful. It's called Scribble and Scrap. It comes out of a study done, I think it was the University of Ohio. And they had a group of people who just noticed their negative thoughts. And they had another group who, when they noticed their negative thought, they scribbled it down on a piece of paper, crumpled it up, and threw it away. The people who scribble and scrap are able to move beyond that negative thought in a more positive manner, taking positive action. So just start noticing your thoughts and the conversation you're having in your head and name that negative thought pattern. Like put a name on it. I call it Felicia because I'm like, bye, Felicia. We're going this way. Like we are not doing this. So put a name on it and be like, no, George, you're done. We're going this way. We are not going in the negative spiral. We're going in the positive direction. Here's the next positive step I can take. So just noticing is the first step of like, oh my goodness, I just said that to myself and I would never say that to my daughter. Because just think of the conversation you have with yourself when you look in the mirror. Oh my goodness, can you see the blemishes on my face? Like, oh, like everybody's going to notice this, like whatever. And like, oh, this pair of jeans, like my love handles, like I got a muffin top, like I'm so fat. And like, you would never talk to your child that way. So just noticing those conversations, and it's like, it's not a straight jump to loving every part of your body. It's all right, can I accept my body today? Can I just accept it? Like this body is amazing. It's like whatever it has been through. My body has been through chronic illness. It's pretty amazing. I'm still alive. whatever your body has been through. I've given birth to children. I've been through this. I've been through that. This body is amazing and it's carried me through all of this. I'm going to accept my body. And then find the parts you actually do love. Like, I love my curly hair. Love it. It's fantastic. It's amazing. I love my curly hair. When I am taking care of myself, working out, eating right, like my arms look amazing. Like I got tank top arms and I love it. So I love that part of my body. I focus on the pieces of my body that I love because my midsection, not my favorite part of my body. So I try not to focus on that part. I look at the pieces I love, and then I can accept the ones that I don't love.
I think one of the other things that gets in our way is that, well, I wish somebody had told me this. Like, I've been in therapy since I was young, and nobody told me, like, to listen to my, like, they didn't give me the right tools to figure out what thoughts I was even having and how to change them. They just said, change your thoughts. And I'm like, how do I do that? I don't know how to do that. But
Yeah.
it starts with the noticing. And if I had known that, like, just, and the tools that you teach on how to start noticing, like the little things, we call them energy snags, and we write them down in a parking lot. Like, so like getting out of your head and not trying to expect that all your thoughts are going to go, all the negative thoughts are going to go away. And that's not what we're saying, because that's not achievable. The negative thoughts will be there. That it's the point of, because I still have the negative thoughts. I don't focus on them anymore. I shift my focus to that's the only way that I was able to change my thinking, is to not try to resist those negative thoughts, see them, and then choose to think of a more positive thought. And you have to start small at first. Like, I have a body. And when I started doing that, like, I could still, like, not, I never thought this would happen, but I can look in the mirror and I'm happy, like comfortable with my body, because, and I haven't, like, I still see things that I would like to change and don't like, but because I started and got in the habit of regularly focusing on the positive, I love myself more, and I'm putting healthier things in my body as a result. I'm doing activities as a result. I'm all of these things, like it all plays in to that mindset and
Yeah.
starting small, right?
Yep. Yeah. You've got to start small. And I love how you talk about, like, these things don't go away. Like, they're still there, but it's a faster shift. It's noticing it sooner. And I love how you talked about, like, you're putting good things in your body, you're taking care of it. It's even getting to the point where you realize your own worth and value, and realizing that you don't value yourself, that you don't have self-worth, that you don't have confidence. Because a lot of us don't realize, I'm one of those, like, I didn't realize how little confidence I had and how little value I thought I had, that I always had to prove myself. And I don't. I am full of value and worth, independent of anything else. And I can walk into a room now knowing my full value and worth and just show up to serve people. I don't have to prove a thing when I walk into that room. I can walk into a room with business owners, big business owners, much larger than my business, and I belong there. I am worthy to be there. So it's that process of, and those things still pop up, but realizing, oh, that thought came back. Okay, let's process that and let's move forward in a positive direction. Oh, I just said that to myself. Okay, let's process why I'm doing that and let's move forward. So it's a faster shift. It's not that any of those things ever go away. Because I'm sure, like, I know when you're dealing with alcohol, like, that's a lifelong thing of, this is something I'm always going to deal with. I'm going to deal with it differently now, but it's always going to be on the radar for me. Food is always going to be on the radar for me, of, like, I need to watch what I do and how I'm self-soothing and or self-sabotaging. Like, you just become more aware and make the shift faster.
If I could add, I think that maybe it's not so much that the substance is always on the radar, but just, it's, at least for me in my experience and some people I've worked with, but more along the lines of, what do I need to do to nourish and care for myself? Right? That is what always is. It's not in my experience, it's not that I'm like, oh, I really wish I could drink because I'm stressed out. If I'm feeling stressed out, I don't necessarily have that thought anymore, but it's more like, oh, I just snapped at my kid.
Mhm.
I need some fresh air. I need some
Mhm.
sunlight. I need some
Mhm.
water, right?
Yep.
And those are the things, in my experience, that have to stay on the radar of how I'm caring for myself.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
and
think
that's such a process of growth of like,
Mhm.
okay, it's not that I need the alcohol now. It's now you're like, okay, so this happened. This is what I need to do. So yeah, it is a
But
continuum for us and in such a growth place. Yeah.
I think what both of you are saying is having it on your radar in a way that it's always going to be there. Like you're never going to go out and not see, you cannot, I knew that right at the beginning. Like I'm never going to be able to get rid of all the alcohol in the world. It's always going to be there. I'm going to have to learn how to not want it or I'm going to be miserable. So
Yeah.
it was like, I know I knew that the alcohol was there and I know it now, but over time and doing this work, my mindset has shifted so I don't notice it. Like it's there, but I don't notice it. And I see it and I just don't want it. And then being able then, because I let go of that, to
Mhm.
focus on what really that's why we think that people get stuck in the alcohol trap because they're trying to use that to cope with everything else. And if they can let go of that one thing, they can start to notice and their radar shift to what is really bothering them, what's really causing them trouble. And so it's like it's all tied in together and it doesn't happen overnight. And it starts with that awareness and noticing and paying attention. But like there's so much that's out of our control. That's
Mhm.
why that control thing ties into so much. Like you cannot, like if you don't like politics, I'm sorry, but it's not going anywhere. You're gonna have to learn how to let that go, or you're gonna let it ruin your day. Like people do that. They let that stuff ruin their days
Yeah.
constantly over things they cannot control. And so this ties into so much.
Yeah. Yep. And that's one of the things I talk about is like, what are you letting ruin your day? Are
Mm.
you letting a 5-minute event in the morning turn into an entire bad day? Because let's say you were on your way out the door for work and you spilled coffee on your white blouse, and like that's an event, it's a fact. And so you're like, you got to go back, you got to change, and now you don't have your coffee because you spilled it, and now you're running late and you're behind the school bus and you're late to work and you walk in late to a meeting, and then you're rehearsing this one incident. You're like, so I dropped, and you're telling everybody this negative thing that happened in your day, and it was this one little incident in the morning where you spilled your coffee that you're allowing. By the end of the day, you get home and you're like, somebody asks you how your day was, like, it was horrible. It was a horrible day. It started with spilling my coffee and then went on from there. And really, if you had allowed that one incident to process, like, oh my goodness, okay, what, spilled my coffee, it happens, change my shirt, show up to work, it is what it is. Let's get on with the day. It's a very different day because you made a different choice.
And that feels more empowering, right? Of putting you in the driver's seat. What am I going to attach myself to? What am I going to choose to let go of instead of letting things happen to you, right? And letting that dictate how you are going to live your life.
Yeah, like we have so much power and control that we give up. And so one of my favorite people to listen to is Brendan Burchard. He's a high performance coach. And so like I have his growth day app, I listen to his podcast, I listen to it all. And he talks about, he's like, people will be like, they stole my joy. And he's like, nobody stole it. Why'd you put it where somebody else could get it? Like, why did you give them that power? And I'm like, we have, like, I say this often, the single biggest breakthrough you're going to have is when you realize how much power and control you have over your own thoughts and stress. Like we have a choice. And I'm like, I will say the unpopular thing, overwhelm is a choice. We have a choice. We have power and control, but we give it over to other people. We give it over to other things. They stressed me out. No, it was just a situation. You made the choice to get stressed about that situation. Because you can look at two people in the exact same situation, one of them thriving and one of them spiraling in negativity and stress, and they're in the exact same situation. What's different? Their perceptions, their power, their control, and who they allow to control. And when we start to take back that power control, it's so empowering. You're like, I have a choice. I get to decide how spilling my coffee affects my day. I can use it as a funny thing of like, oh, you won't believe what happened to me this morning. I tend to now use those kind of things as just like, laugh with me about this. This is what happened today. This is really funny. Like in 1 year, I blew 2 tires, 2 flat tires. I use that as a story now when I do training because I was on my way to church, heels, dress, everything. I'm supposed to be teaching. I get a flat tire on the side of the road. I'm like, if I hadn't done the work that I have done in stress management and healing myself, I would have been a puddle on the side of the road. Instead, instead, popped off the heels, threw on the flip-flops I had. It was a whole thing. I changed my own tire, folks. I'm pretty proud of myself. And I
Love
didn't cry at all. Not one tear. I
But
took care of the situation.
and for all the skeptics and pessimists, I was that. Like I would look at people like you and be like, that's easy for you to say. And people like Brendan Burchard would annoy me because they're so positive. I'm like, how the, like, yeah, that must be nice. You don't have to deal with the problems I have to deal with. Like, but that's because that's the mindset I was in. And that was the repeating thoughts and like giving all that power to everything outside of me. And it wasn't about trying to get control of the things that I wanted to be in control of. It was about letting go. It was just letting go of trying to control all of that stuff. And I swear to God, all the people that I met now, when I have that different lens on, that's positive. It's not like they're walking around like sunshine and rainbows, like everything's perfect in their world and nothing bothers them. It's that they understand that there's only so much they can control, and they're not going to let it take their peace or their happiness. They have bad days too. They just don't show it the way we do. And it started with like that whole mindset of like the negative, and that's, if that's what you see, that's all you see, and you keep seeing it and keep seeing it, keep seeing it. And I just had to start with letting some of it go, and like that's the place to start, that letting go of it. And it's crazy, but that gives you the power back. And then when you're clear and you can see things clearly, even if you think that someone else is causing your stress, there's always something you can do to
Mhm.
solve that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And like, I love how you said what we look for is what we see. And I use that example all the time in my trainings of like, I got it from Brad Bizjack, another high performance coach. And he'll tell you, he's like, look around the room and look for red, look for red, look for red. And you find all these red things. You're like, okay, now look for blue, look for blue, look for blue. And he's like, well, how many red things did you find while you were looking for blue? And you're like, well, none. He's like, that's because that's what you're looking for. And it's just like when you buy a car, I drive a dark gray Toyota Highlander. Once I bought that, do you know how many people have dark gray Toyota Highlanders or even just dark gray midsize SUVs? I'm like, and they park right next to me. You know how many times I've almost gotten in the wrong vehicle? I have to like look for the thing hanging from my mirror to make sure it's the right car. What we look for is what we find. So when we're in that cycle of negativity, that is exactly what we're going to find. We're going to find the negative people. We're going to find the negative events. And when we start to notice that, it's that noticing. And I'm realizing, I'm like, you know what? When you listen to Brendan's story, I'm like, he's no different than me. When you look at these high performers that were like, oh yeah, must be nice to be them. I'm like, they started exactly where I am. They started out their business with like zero experience, zero money, zero connection, all of this. And you're like, and they achieved that. So when I realized, for me, it was realizing where these people came from that were at a place I want to be. I'm like, well, how do you get there? And I'm like, oh, you start where I am. That's where they started. I'm like, the people that are on the platform in the convention center aren't any different than me. They're just 20 chapters ahead of me. And I'm wanting to get to chapter 20 without going through 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
And I love this because it all really connects of this is all just very human, right? Everything you're feeling, all the self-defeat, the stress, it's all very human. You are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. This is it. And you can have a choice of how you want to move forward. And you can have a choice of who you surround yourself with. And you can have a choice of who you get support from, because it can be very difficult to change, and humans are not meant to do things in solidarily. We're meant to be in community with each other and to support each other, and that's how we're just kind of designed. So you don't have to do it all on your own. And Naomi was so gracious to put together a free gift for people who are saying, I'm in this spiral, I can't see through, so that you can start building your 5 foundations in a very step-by-step way. Could you share a little bit more about that, Naomi?
Absolutely. So it's a PDF that I put together of my 5 foundations that I just kind of briefly went through for you. And under each one, it gives you tips and areas that you can work on in each one. So you can be like, okay, let me pick 1 or 2 of these to work on that I feel like I can do. Don't do all of them. Don't. Like, that's too much. Start small, look at it and be like, okay, movement. I'm going to start with movement because I know physically and mentally I need it. So I'm going to start with a 5-minute walk every day at lunch. Start small, start simple. And so that's what that PDF is. It gives you tips in each area of where you can start, what you can work on. And then also it will get you an email where you'll get a link that you can book a session with me, a free session, to start applying these in your life so that you can see success.
I think that's important too, because the thing that happens a lot is we expect it to be like a light switch, or we have some expectation of what this change is going to look like for us. And we're so attached to that vision when things don't go, which they never do, the way that you imagined, then you're failing or it's not working. And then I know it was, for me, it made me give up all the time. And that's why having a coach,
Yep.
somebody else that can see that, especially if they've been through it, they're going to be able to see what you can't see when you're in the middle of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation, and I think that it will bring some hope to people that they can move forward with small changes. So thank you so much for your time, Naomi.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
All right, we'll talk soon.